I'd like to call the June meeting of the Kansas State Board of Education to order. Welcome to everybody who's here today to be present for our meeting. All board members are present. I would like to read the mission of the Kansas State Board of Education: to prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. I would invite you to join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We'll now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have several amendments to our agenda for today, so I would like to make you aware of those, and then we will need a motion to amend the agenda with these changes. We need to change the status of Item 8, Update on State Assessment, from information only to a receive item. We need to add a consent item for personnel, 16A1. We will be considering a revised consent item, 16K, for the Carl Perkins Reserve Competitive Grant, and we need to add approval of the June 3rd special board meeting minutes. And I would ask you to check your packet for information on each of these items, as well as attachments related to the state assessment, the wellness policy guidelines, and our focus group responses. There's both a summary and a comprehensive list in your packet, and I know you'll want to look at those. So I would entertain a motion to amend the agenda with the changes that I announced. Dina Horst moves. Is there a second? Ken Willard seconds. Is there discussion? Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would respectfully request item 16D to be pulled for further information. At 16D as in David, act to approve local in-service education plans.
Have you had a chance to direct your questions to anyone in the department to have your issues clarified?
No, I have not, and I apologize for that.
Okay. Maybe that could happen before we vote on the consent agenda later, but we will pull 16B.
D as in David.
D. Okay. Other questions or comments? Then all those in favor of amending the agenda, raise your right hand. Opposed? We have a 10-0 vote. Then we will need a vote to approve the agenda as amended. Carolyn Campbell, Steve Roberts seconds. Discussion. All in favor, raise your right hand. Good. So our agenda is approved. Now we will need to approve the May minutes. And do we need, can we include the June 3rd? No, we've already addressed that. Okay. So I would ask for a motion to approve the May minutes. Moved by Ken Willard, seconded by Carolyn Campbell. All in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you. Next on our agenda then is the Commissioner's report, so I will turn it over to Brad. Excuse me?
Need a vote.
Oh, so we do need a separate vote on that. Okay. Moved by Dina Horst to approve the June minutes of the special board meeting, and seconded by Sally Koppel. All in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you. So we have a unanimous vote on that. Now we're ready for the Commissioner's report.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice you could all make it. No one washed into a ditch or a culvert on the way in this morning, but it was nice. I think I had 3.5 inches of rain just yesterday, so it was good for the state to get some rain like that. It was needed. I also want to thank everybody for having the special meeting last week. There was, again, 2 really important goals to that. One was to allow more time for those regulations to get across the street and get through the process, which just increased the likelihood that if we have teachers or individuals that fit any of those, we can hopefully process them in a timely manner and answer a lot of questions that we've been getting from the field. So I appreciate you doing that a week in advance. The first thing I want to share with you is a report that this is our 3rd report. We use Alltech out of KU. They survey our school districts. We had 73% response, which is really good from the field, so we appreciate school districts when they respond to our surveys. But this is just, will kind of paint in a wide brush the landscape of how technology is being used and where Kansas is in the landscape of technology. Everywhere from student computer ratios, school districts that are using one-to-one laptop initiatives. We see an increase in that every year. It lets you know what types of devices are being used across the state, anywhere from the growth of iPads to laptops to Chromebooks, access to broadband. Even though it's increasing, it still kind of shows you in some areas of the state where challenges still exist in having broadband accessibility. Digital learning readiness. There's some really good information in here about how school districts, especially at the high school level, are moving away from that traditional textbook and moving into more technology-enhanced resources in the classroom. There's also some really good information about how school districts are adapting and changing to letting students bring their own technology into the classroom, different policies that are being written across the state to be able to allow that access, and how do you keep a secure environment. Again, the digital textbooks, as well as professional learning that's going on across the state and how that's being delivered. So this just was released within the last few days, so I thought you might like a copy of that, spare reading, but it really kind of gives you the landscape of how technology is not only changed, how it's being used, and yet still what some of the challenges are across Kansas, as well as how we compare nationally in our efforts and initiatives. The next thing I just wanted to update you on, we have started conversations with higher ed, visited with Board of Regents. We had a meeting Friday afternoon of really trying to shift the conversation around if this board means college and career ready, how do we really measure that? We've focused for pretty much a generation of kids on one state assessment. And we know that just measures academic readiness. What we really want to shift the conversation to is even though how kids are academically prepared, maybe based on a state assessment and other measures, what do we truly know about how successful kids are when they leave K-12 and they enter post-secondary? And we have that data. We know right now what % of kids need remediation when they enter post-secondary. We know of those kids that needed remediation, in what areas did they need it, and what % of those kids successfully completed their first or second year. We also know how many kids are going to 2-year, 4-year trade schools. So we have that information. What we're really trying to do right now is start the conversation that if K-12 and higher ed could set some common goals, because, you know, how a kid does when they leave our system is probably a better measure of how successful we are than just how they scored their junior year on a test. Those are good predictions and those are important, but we have the information already at our fingertips to really change the conversation of if we know there's an industry out there that's lacking, or if we know that we have a lot of kids going to 4-year and aren't successful, but they should be going to 2, that information's there. So we're going to start setting some goals, backward mapping it to the point where we know by the time we have them, what can we do to help reduce the % of kids need remediation, increase the % of kids that are getting to 2-year, 4-year. So we started that conversation last week. We have a long ways to go, but just wanted to let you know post-secondary is very interested in working with K-12 and this board to identify some gaps, some challenges, and then starting to put some initiatives in place, the things that we have control of and some things that they have control of, but we're both talking about the same information and the same goals. So we started that last week, and I'll keep you updated on where we're at on that. Another thing, just to update you on, the 23rd of this month will be the first time we've brought together, that I know of, or in the last 8 years, we have difficulty as an agency communicating to the field. We have one math consultant, one science consultant, one history government. But we have a lot of pertinent information that the field needs to know. So we put together what we're calling the Kansas Professional Learning Team. I have to be careful when I make up names because there's always an acronym sometimes that comes out that is not always appropriate. So we tried to make sure that the KPLT coming around is a list of the initial members of that. And the goal of this is to help us as an agency, number one, communicate key initiatives better to the field. But number two, to have a stage or a platform to where we can hear periodically from the field, what do they need to know? At what depth of knowledge do they need to hear it? So we intentionally looked for people across the state that their responsibility is providing professional learning to their staff. We know a lot of our school districts go to a service center. So we called all the service centers together and said, give us one person that can serve on this team. We also chose someone regionally that represents or lives in the area of a service center. So the service center then has someone out in a building that they can call on when they need to do professional learning. We also know we have a lot of our large districts that don't access service centers, so we took like the top 10, 12 districts in the state and called them and said, send us one person. We reached out to some other groups, and basically this is just a start, and we're meeting our first time Monday, June 23rd, to start a conversation about, number one, what do you need to know? We will have agency staff people there first day talking about, come August, what does your staff need to know about teacher licensure and accreditation? What do they need to know about assessments? And then they're going to give us information about how we can get the best use out of a group of people that we can bring in 2 to 3 times a year, get into some deep conversations about initiatives across the state, create some good presentation materials, and then they can then go back out, and we know at least every service center, every large district, every people across the state are all starting on the same page, the same conversation. So anyway, just wanted to let you know, this is new. We hope to keep it going annually. We have a little bit of Title IIA money in the agency that is around professional learning. And so we thought this would be a good start to get some key people in from the field to help us communicate information.
I see that Sally, do you have a question? Sally Cobble.
Couple of them. Brad, thank you. That was a great report. On the second item you talked about,
With post-secondary?
yes, post-secondary. One of the initiatives that Kathy and I, when we're on that council, K-Board and KSDE, one of their initiatives is we really wanted to see them move on the fast track towards getting the, gosh, I lost the term. When kids, we don't want them after high school having to take these classes to bring them up to speed. We want that happening before they graduate. What you're talking about, is that leading to the development of those programs?
Yes. Matter of fact, you're talking the coordinating council?
Yes.
Yes, and I met with Andy Tompkins last week as we started looking at setting an agenda for the coordinating council, because I think we're going to meet tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, we were.
There was only one item, really. They didn't have some.
That was probably it.
But Andy and I talked about this very conversation that we wanted to. So that was on like Tuesday. Friday afternoon, we had Board of Regents. We had Blake Flanders from the Tech Ed Authority. And just a start to say, we know there's people that aren't at the table that need to be here. But is this something that we think is a goal of both K-12 and post-secondary that we think is important to get a group together? And and then that's where the coordinating council could say, all right, if that's our goal, what do we need to be doing the senior year? Then we can start putting some key initiatives together, not only K-12, but post-secondary, to try and reach those.
I do know that the last time the council met, that was our number one goal,
Yes.
was to get that going. The other thing, your Kansas Professional Learning Team, this is a great idea. Is this your answer to, I think I personally do not feel like sometimes the information that we want to get out doesn't get all the way to the teacher and sometimes to the principal. So is this your form of getting to the principal and the information all the way down the pipe instead of just to the superintendents?
This is one extra tool in the bag. There's no silver bullet, but this is one of the shiny ones.
Okay.
Because in coordination with this, we also started this year principal academies,
Right.
which is, we met with hundreds of principals this year for the first time around the same initiatives that this group will be working on. So it is another way. Again, the biggest thing we realized was two things. One, there was an audience we weren't in front of enough, and that was principals, because it's hard to get in front of 40,000 teachers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easier to get in front of the people that lead those teachers, so we started the principal academies. The biggest initiative for the Kansas Professional Learning Team is to make sure whatever the message is, it's being delivered consistently across the state and at a level that the state needs it at. So yes, I think this will help, but it's just one other tool to be able to try and get out clear, consistent, timely information.
Well, I appreciate that. The one thing that the focus groups really brought out in the ones that I went to was the inconsistency of the information, and then not all of the information on what we're trying to do in this state, because we're doing a lot of changes, and it's not getting to the teachers on why we are doing what we are doing. And then, so I appreciate that and your attempt. On this digital learning, one thing came up that I thought was interesting, because I didn't ever think of this. I had a mother at one of the focus groups that said she doesn't like the digital learning because she doesn't have any papers that come home. She doesn't have anything that she can help her child with, that everything in her child everything is on this little laptop that he keeps at school. And so I thought that was interesting that we do have somebody going to that extreme, and none of us around even thought of that as being a problem. We were all, thinking of digital learning as a tool instead of, so I thought that was interesting. That's it.
Carolyn Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question to Commissioner is, did you say that there will be additions to these folks here, or there's a possibility?
Yes.
Okay.
This was just the first group, the first look at it, trying to make sure when at the first meeting we had representation from all corners of the state, all regions, and to make sure all large districts had someone to.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not sure you were finished when I started letting people ask you questions, so Brad, continue.
The only last thing I had is that Diane had put together a little over a year ago the Achievement Gap Committee. I've met with them once since then, and we're pulling together some more information about identifying really who are, when we talk gaps between who, where are they concentrated. So we have some more information that Tony Moss on the agency team is putting together, and then they will be coming back towards the end of this month to start really taking a little deeper dive into, are we talking urban issues? Are we talking rural issues when we talk about, gaps? So we're moving forward with that. They'll be coming together again towards the end of this month. That's all I had.
Dina Horst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we were talking about digital learning and everything being on a laptop or on an iPad, I thought it was quite interesting. An interview was done by our newspaper of all of the students who were Governor Scholars. And several of them mentioned that they really preferred books. So I'm not sure that we're going down the right path totally. So it's something we may want to think about in that regard. Cost is less expensive, yes, but there's something about turning pages that is part of the learning process, part of brain activity. So, thank you.
Ken Willard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just echo what Dina just said. I think that we want to utilize technology as extensively as we possibly can as a tool for learning, but not to get focused on technology for technology's sake, and I know we all agree with that. But there was another study that I just saw last week. I think it was put out by Ed Week or someone that just said there is a definite connection between learning to write and actual brain development, and the interaction with the printed page. So I think we don't want to go overboard with it, and we just want to be sure that we're continually aware of that. But in the case of the lady who is concerned because she doesn't get any papers home, that paperwork is a click away from her being able to see it on her own computer at home. And I think there's hardly anybody at home that doesn't have a computer today. So we all have to move forward on this matter. But I had a question about the Kansas Professional Learning Team, which sounds like a great initiative, but I'm just not really clear on what their charge is. Are they going to be communicating to the field, or are they going to be developing curriculum or learning modules that are going to be used by teachers and principals? Or I'm not exactly sure what their mission is, except to help.
The initial purpose for bringing this team together is we say no to giving presentations across the state more than we say yes, because, like I said, I'm all over the state, but I can't be everywhere. And the same so we have messages from an agency to communicate to the field. We just don't have enough people. So one of our goals was, let's bring in a large group of people from across the state. Because the majority of school districts go to their service centers for professional development. We want to make sure that the people that they go to are giving the same message in all 7 service centers initially that we're giving. That way we can eliminate some of the inconsistency. And so that's the number one purpose. Bring them in. We will get, I'll take an example. Let's say student growth measures and how those will be used in teacher leader evaluations. There's a lot of messaging and work to do around that, and we don't have the staff. But I think better, let's bring in the people that will be carrying that message, take a deep dive into it, create some good documents, presentations, materials. That way, when they go back out to work with their constituents, whether they're at a school district or a service center, they've had the same conversation with other good educators, and they're all on the same page, and they all have the same PowerPoints and documents and stuff. So that's the purpose of it, is spreading on key initiatives a consistent message. I think it will also help us as an agency of really honing in on what do they need to know, at what level do they need to know it. Then as a group, we can create those messages and then they take them back out. So.
Okay, well, obviously, for best communication, it has to be two-way. And so I'm hoping that this team can also be a way for us to get better information about, as you said, what the field needs or their view or input on initiatives that we're putting out there, whether they're practical or not. So I'm just hoping that it enhances good two-way communication.
In the beginning of it, the first half of the day that Monday is going to be, we don't want this just to be come in a couple days twice a year. What do we do throughout the year to where we can create a listserv or a communication platform for this group? So when they're out there presenting, someone comes up with a question that they don't know the answer, we can have a continual dialogue from people on our staff, people out in the field, and at the same time, throughout the year, we have ways for them to communicate, hey, here's what we're hearing out here. Here's what they need information on. We can immediately start working on it. So it's a continuous dialogue.
Did you give a date for that meeting?
It's June 23rd.
June 23. And where is that going to be?
In this room.
Okay.
In the boardroom here. I believe it's in the boardroom, but it's...
Okay.
But I'll let you know on that. Again, it's just a way they can help us better improve our communication, and we have a better vehicle for us to be able to communicate.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Then the next item on our agenda is Citizens Open Forum. We do not have anybody that is formally checked in for that. Is there anyone present that hasn't filled out a card for Citizens Open Forum? Wow. If not, we will move on, and I suppose if anyone comes in before 11, we can accommodate them. That brings us to... Sorry, John Bacon.
Well, since we didn't have anyone of the public that wanted to speak, I was going to continue with the previous item and ask Brad a question on the digital learning. Is it possible, one of the things that I did as a parent is had the opportunity to review my child's textbook. So if textbooks are online or on a computer, is that information communicated to parents so that they can view that material and have a chance to learn alongside with the child?
I think that's approached uniquely by every district. I know the experience I've had in districts and the experience I have as a parent is back-to-school parent-teacher conferences. They walked through the digital textbooks and all the materials with those of us that showed up. I also know that their selection committee includes people from their site council and stuff. So I don't think, my experience, I don't think school districts have really changed their process of textbook selections or stuff other than they're now looking at more digital resources that supplement textbooks. So, but those are unique to each district on how they approach that.
I don't know if it's something that we need to, a policy we should recommend or set as a board, state body, but I think it's important that those materials are open and accessible for the parents. So I don't know what we can do to require that or encourage that. That's just my feeling as one member of this body, but I think that's important. I really don't have a problem with digital textbooks, but I want them to be accessible to everyone. So, thank you.
And that is a good point, John, because when they have a textbook, usually they take it home and parents can see it. So just the accessibility of the online text is good. And to follow up on Dina's point, we all realize that all students learn in different ways, and there are some that learn better from a book, some that learn better online. So that's something we need to consider as we move forward. Good discussion. Any other comments or questions? Then I believe our next agenda item is scheduled for 11, and I don't know if our presenters are ready. They are? Good. Then we will move forward with our update on state assessment by Scott Smith and Mary Ann Perry.
Hardest part of any presentation is this bloody podium. So thank you. As you all are aware, this was changed from an update item to a receive item. So our goal today is to do actually both, update you and to help clarify what exactly you will be receiving. A lot has happened since May, when I was here last. And so sort of think of it as three things that we'll be providing you an update on. Number one, the close of the testing window. Number two, the Technical Advisory Council meeting, which was held May 21st and 22nd. And three, the Kansas Assessment Advisory Council meeting that took place in early June, I believe June 3rd. We do, in fact, have one representative here today, Dan Grumman, who was at both the TAC meeting and sits on the Assessment Advisory Council meeting. So with that, just in the way of introduction, the technical stuff I'm going to leave to Dr. Perry, thankfully. So just to review two general 2014 assessment goals, just to sort of take us back to the conversations that we've had here in the past. We wanted this year to provide Kansas students and teachers state assessments that were aligned or are aligned to current standards in instruction. As you well know, the College of Career Ready standards were adopted in 2010, and to give the old assessment would be to give the students a state assessment that was just simply not aligned. So that was one of our goals. And then number two, to provide students and teachers exposure to and practice with the new Kansas Interactive Test Engine, the acronym being KITE, in anticipation of 2015. So we didn't run a field test in the sense of running just certain students through this assessment, but we indeed ran everyone through this transitional assessment and through the new test engine. We learned some things. And some difficult things. In spite of our distributed denial of service attack, for lack of a better word, large numbers of students completed the assessments. And as you may recall, the updates that I've been giving were those incremental reports of where we are with regard to completed assessments. Dr. Perry can speak a little bit more as to what exactly we mean by completer, and she'll talk about that later. Students were engaged with the new assessments. We know that to be true. Of all the challenges that we faced this year, the quality of the test items and the new test was not the issue. It was just accessing that test. CETE gained valuable data on new technology-enhanced questions and all items aligned to the new content standards. We knew that was something that would have to be done en route again to 2015. Districts also gained valuable experience with the KITE testing engine. One thing that it's very difficult to present to you is the kind of conversations that took place on listservs and over the phone during this testing window that would all fall under the general heading of troubleshooting and problem solving. It's a testament to the wherewithal and the sophistication of test coordinators and administrators in Kansas schools. As I said, as we all know, we've been doing assessments, computerized assessments for a while, and I'll just say that the traffic when we were experiencing the attack was impressive. Dr. Perry, again, may be able to speak a little more to that. CET is currently developing enhancements to KITE based on field feedback. This was, again, something that we knew we would have to do in order to move forward. You're up.
Thanks. Podium's a great height if you're 5'6". So part I want to talk about is what did the data show us? What have our preliminary analysis shown? And one of the things that I found troubling was looking at the difference between a student saying, I've completed the test, meaning I'm done, save and submit, versus when I looked at the data to see how many items they actually completed. So we have been continually reporting how many students have completed the test. We've been doing that through social media, through formal updates to the board, formal letters to Diane and Brad. So our last formal update to the board, we reported that we had about 84% of the kids completing the assessment. At the end of the window, this did not go up by a lot, and it varied quite a bit by grade. So the highest grade was grade 6, completed just over 90% of their assessments, but in high school we had fewer than 60% completed. But a distinction I want to make now is that complete means submitted. That means the student said, I am done and I'm submitting this test. And just an FYI, at the end of the testing period, we had about 20,000 tests that had been started but not submitted. So those are the kids that gave up somewhere in there, which is actually, I think Smarter Balance is at 450,000 kids who have started but not completed. So one of the things we have looked at is we know that on April 11th was our first good testing day. It was the first day where we had fixed every technology issue. The DDoS was contained. We had the net around the servers. We knew every school was able to access the new firewall built to stop the DDoS, because it took us about a week to get every school district back to being able to access our server again once we strengthened the firewall. But April 11th was the first day where our help desk was extremely quiet, and kids were testing, and we were getting emails saying it's working, it's working, it's working. So a lot of what we've done is look at, well, what's the difference between March 10th and April 10th, which I'll call the problem period, and April 11th and May 16th, which is the good period. And part of my concern as a psychometrician when I look at these data is the kids who took the test during those two time periods had different experiences. Several things happened during the March 10th to April 10th window that meant items could take a couple of minutes to appear, so students had long waits between items. Some things wouldn't download. For instance, a math item, even a multiple choice math item, it would have a graph with a line on it, and then the question was, please give me the equation that matches this line. Well, the graph never loaded. So they would get the questions with the answers. And some schools told the kids guess, some schools told the kids skip. As a psychometrician, it's hard to tell if a student guessed at an item because they couldn't see the whole item, or if they guessed at the item because they didn't know the answer. People guess for all kinds of reasons. But from a validity perspective, those are two very different reasons for guessing. Kids would often get booted out during the March 10th to April 11th, and we certainly know on the 2 days where we got hit with the DDoS, they were booted out and the system crashed. They couldn't get back in, or they were just stuck with that worrying little circle thing that never moves. So they had very, very different experiences. And we've done some research in the field outside of Kansas that shows it is a different experience if you get booted out and reboot. Even if you eventually see every item, the sit and wait changes how you respond to an assessment versus one that works perfectly. So let me show you one of the things we looked at, which is completion rates. When I talk about that, meaning percent of questions answered. So of all the kids who submitted a test that I'm done and submitted, between March 10th and April 10th, the troubling period, we had between 70 and 84% of the items completed. Okay, that means there's a lot of items they didn't answer. Either they couldn't see them, so they skipped them, or they gave up before the test. They could get to the end and just said, submitted, I'm done. So you look at those who finished less than 50% of the test. What concerns me in grade 8 and high school is we've got 14% of kids in grade 8 and high school who didn't even finish 50% of the test. When they've finished 90%, I can do some psychometric adjustments and say, well, let's just see, let's take out the ones they didn't and look at the ones that they did and see how they did on them. When I've got 50%, I can't impute a score for those kids. Compare that to mathematics and the good period. Now we've got, I don't know what happened in grade 8. Grade 8's a funny grade. But look at the rest of the grades. 93 to 7% finished every single item. This is much more typical of what we see in Kansas data from the past. Kids skip items here and there because they don't know the answer and don't want to guess. But this is very common. And then you look at the more than 90% finished, we're up there at 97 to 99%. And my numbers of less than 50% are very small at this point. So let's look at ELA. The other thing I want you to notice on ELA is how many kids took the test between March 10th and April 10th. So we had in the tens of thousands. In math, we've got in the 20s thousands for ELA. So we had about 2/3 of our kids took the ELA test in the problem period. So again, we've got between 72, and 82% of the kids finished the entire test. That's a lot of skipped items. And again, when I look at my 50%, I've got between 4 and 13% of the kids didn't even complete 50% of the test. So these are kids, again, I can't even impute a score for. And again, things look lovely, even in 8th grade, in our good period. So now we've got between, 97 and 98% finished the entire test, answered every single question in the good period. And we're up to 99%, finished 90%, and minuscule numbers for less than half. So I'm confident in the data that from 411 to 516. Those are good data. I can produce valid scores from those data. But I brought the TAC in, our Technical Advisory Committee, and this is made up of 6 members who are nationally recognized across the country as being psychometricians, test development experts, curriculum experts. One in particular focuses on issues of students with disabilities and English language learners to make sure that we're representing the full population when we have these conversations. And we brought them in for 2 days and spent one day really talking about what do we do with 2014. And actually, I should say before that, I brought in a group within KU, because we have a graduate program in educational measurement, the REMS program, Research and Educational Measurement and Statistics, I think it is. But we brought in professors from our REMS program who teach this stuff all the time, and I sat down with them and I said, what would you do? And they're numbers geeks. So they came up with a way at the district level that I could impute scores by looking at last year's data compared to this year's data for the good period and say, if this is how the relationship between last year and this year on the good period, let's assume that would have been the relationship on the bad period, blah, 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 blah. So I brought that to the TAC, and that's what the TAC said, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's nice. You can make up all these scores for kids, but you can't actually get them scores. And so we talked about this in terms of the level of data. So can we produce scores at a student level? Can we give each student a score? Can we produce them at a school level? Can we aggregate up to give school level scores? Can we aggregate at the district level? Can we aggregate at the state? Can we produce actual scores versus doing some of this psychometric mumbo jumbo and imputing scores and saying we think this is what you would have done if you'd had a good testing experience? So we went round and round on all these things, and we put it in the context of remember how these data are going to be used. First of all, we wanted to give data back to the educators for the purpose of here's how you're doing on the new standards. Here are areas your students are strong in, weak in. Some students are good, some students are bad, but give them some information. Of course, the federal government would like us to use it in a school and district accountability systems. They would like us to continue to produce data and show where schools and districts are in terms of meeting AMOs. And then for us at CET, we really needed to look at the psychometric properties of the items and see which ones worked well and which didn't. Are there any items that seemed to be unfair for a certain population of students, seemed ridiculously hard, or just had some kind of an issue? One thing we look for example, is multiple choice item, kids continually pick the same incorrect answer. That's a red flag for us. If the correct answer is C and majority of kids pick D, that's not a good item. So, from my perspective, speaking as a CETE director, it's two concerns for me. What we've been reading about in the papers and people talk about is the term validity. Are the data valid? We will not produce data that are not valid. But my concern is also fairness. And that means I can produce valid scores for some kids. Is that fair? If I can't produce valid scores for every kid. So, we talked about this with the TAC, and then as Scott mentioned, we brought it to the CAC last week. And one of our biggest concerns is that there are huge differences, as you just saw, between the two halves of the test in terms of skipped items. So let alone item performance. We haven't even done the item performance analysis yet. So I don't know if kids did better in the second half than the first. One of the concerns in any kind of a data analysis that has something like this, where we know there's a different experience between March 10th and April 10th than there is between April 11th and May 16th, excuse me, is that if I could say students were randomly assigned a testing day, and so there's no difference between kids who took it in the first half of the window or the second half of the window, I might be able to pull something out. But I have no reason to believe that. I don't know. There's certainly by district calendars. There's certainly some districts who took things early and some districts who took things late. We know we don't have a lot of data from two of our big districts, Topeka and Wichita. So we're concerned about the fairness. Our internal REMS committee and the TAC both had very big concerns about the validity of the data from March 10th to April 10th, that these probably do not truly reflect the ability levels of our students. And the CAC in particular said, we are concerned about giving data that aren't valid. We don't want to give a student or a teacher data and says, the kids are not doing well in this area when that was the area that had the technology problems. Have nothing to do with teaching or what the student knows. That it's not only not helpful, it could actually push a teacher to teach differently in a way that is counter to what she should be doing. And then so if I take that and say, okay, so I really don't want to do much with my data from March 10th to April 10th. One of my concerns is students completed a third of the math tests and 2/3 of the ELA tests in that window. And it's especially that ELA test that makes me concerned. Again, if I start getting into the psychometric and mumbo-jumbo of imputing. And if I think about it, I can report scores. I can report student level scores from April 11th through May 16th. But is that fair? And I guess for me personally, because I spent a lot of time on the phone with districts, teachers, et cetera, during the bad window, is it amazed me how persistent everybody was with working through the problems. Very few people gave up on us. We worked with people daily. Our technology team was on the phone. We opened our help desk hours to 12 hours a day. They worked nights, they worked weekends, dealing with emails. And the schools stuck with us. And to say, those of you that stuck with us and really worked hard through the time period, we're not giving you data. But those of you that waited and said, we're not touching this thing until you've got it fixed, we're going to give you data. That just feels inherently unfair to me. And I'm concerned about the fact that there are schools out there that only tested during March 10th to April 10th. I have one district that completely tested, finished all their testing before April 10th. So I can't give scores that I'm confident in for those schools in those districts, or that district. So I will say straight out, my personal recommendation is I don't want to have to produce scores. I am obviously here to get your feedback because I work for you. So if you tell me to produce scores, I'll produce scores. But I'm concerned about it. And the one thing, though, I do want to be clear on is I did get the data I needed to do the item analysis. I know I can build a good test for next year. We have enough data, and we've looked at it from April 11th to May 16th. That's what we're using for our item analyses. And we're seeing from that, just that we've got some items that we're going to need to throw out. But less than 10%. Most of our items behaved very well from a psychometric perspective, behaved very well in terms of their properties and when the students took them.
Just to clarify, some procedural things. We're in uncharted waters here insofar as you may know, in the past, we have brought assessment data to the board in the fall. And in the process of doing so, that data became final. We're in a very different world here. And so our plan was to make this a receive item, come forward with this information, and then return in July. And at that point, we would have a recommendation. I want to I know you've looked at it, but you do have the 2 letters in your materials that were submitted by the TAC and by our Kansas Assessment Advisory Council. I saw George Abel walk in the door as Marianne was speaking. George, welcome. It's the chair of that group and was instrumental in writing that letter and overseeing the writing of it. So that, just to back up for a second, is our plan. We do not today have an official recommendation. We thought it best to provide you with what we know now. And a couple of things. Marianne talked about validity. Another way in which we are in uncharted waters or new waters, we have always taken the issue of validity very, very seriously. Our goal in the Kansas Assessment Program has always been to get a valid score from every student, because we realize we are making a pronouncement about them. What does Johnny know or not know relative to this construct? So, for example, in the past, anytime we thought that the validity of that inference was threatened, we had a way of removing that student from the denominator, if you will, the pile of students assessed in that school. So, for example, we know that a student may have endured some kind of trauma, a car accident, or some medication was changed, something very significant in that student's life. The school would contact us and say, look, we simply don't think that because of these extenuating circumstances, we're going to get a valid score. That's fine. We apply what we refer to as a special circumstance code. That's the same kind of thing, in my opinion, that we're looking at here, only much greater magnitude. The validity of these scores is threatened because of precisely the kinds of things Marianne mentioned. But again, just as a matter of protocol, we are planning to be back here in July with a recommendation that I suspect would require a motion and a vote, because the authority obviously lies with this board as to what we eventually do with these scores. So again, I've sort of stepped all over this slide. That's okay. You have, as I mentioned, a letter signed by members of the Kansas Technical Advisory Council recommending against release of student building district level data and only reporting state level data. That's part of what we would plan to do next month. Is Marianne could speak further as to what exactly do we want to do with the state level data. A letter from the Kansas Assessment Advisory Council addressing the release of student building district level data, essentially saying that the same thing. An alternative recommendation by both grades release a few items at each grade for both subjects that exemplify areas students excelled in and struggled with. So what we're saying there is a way to provide feedback about this year's state assessments short of individual scores. There's a way to talk about, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Marianne, trend data at individual item level, something that teachers could look at and say, I understand because we had this cyber attack, these things affected the validity of individual test takers, but we have enough data after the 4/11 date that we can really think about what we did, how the students did do. We also have to be very mindful, and this would be part of our recommendation next month, of what the ramifications are of our being in possession of the state data. If it's compromised, if the validity of it is compromised, and we are in possession of it, we release it, it's very difficult to say, well, in fact, impossible to say we're going to give it to a select group of people. At that point, anyone wanting to do research, requesting that data, we would have to make it available as a result of open records law. And again, so what we would want to be doing or expect that we would do in July, we'll need a board decision on whether to release assessment scores. KSDE and CT will provide examples of information other than assessment scores from 2014 assessments that can provide to schools, teachers, and parents, and may have further discussion on the implications of not releasing assessment scores, releasing compromised assessment scores. Obviously, the U.S. Department of Education, depending upon this board's decision, would have to be part of things. They're well aware of our challenges. We've had Brad and I and a number of people in the agency have had at least 2 lengthy conversations. The story has been picked up nationally. So this is a very public challenge that we've faced this year. And that's all we have.
I want to say, before I open this up for other questions or comments, I am relieved to hear what you're saying. This has been a big concern of mine from the beginning. You know, when we first talked about this, I think we described it as being a trial run. And my feeling was that the main purpose of it was to give you input in developing the test for next year. I was hoping all along that we would not release data because I felt like it would be unfair to the schools, unfair to the students, particularly after all the problems that were unforeseen that developed. And so I'm so glad to hear the thoughtful discussions that have taken place around this, and that the people involved realize how difficult it would be and the position we would put schools and the state in if we release this data. Now, I see Sally Cobble has a question.
I've got a few comments. Marianne, I was so thankful to see that you really highlighted the purpose of the data analysis for us, that I agree with you on what our purposes were for, and that's nice that we're all on the same page at the same time on some of these. One of the things I became increasingly aware of as it went, as from April to May kept going on, is how many people in the field really did not know that this was a field and a pilot test. That truly concerned me. Somehow we did not get the right information out. I don't know what we did. I don't know what we didn't do. But it was troubling for me, and I think that's why I was asking Brad earlier today you know, how are we going to get what we are actually doing with these tests to the people that are giving them, that they're there every day and experiencing this. And what I'm hearing back from them is they understand all the problems around giving test scores and whatever, but the teachers would like to see an example of what they would get back. And so they could start having conversations on how to read that document and how they will be able to use that as a tool. And my concern was I didn't want to give them a child that they might make wrong decisions about to use it, but is there some besides these trends I thought was a good idea that you had. But do they have the document already on what it would look like? Can we send a fake something out so they can learn and train on? That's my concern.
Mm-hmm. I would like to actually take advantage of this year delay if it turns into that. And I think the best way to develop a report is to have my team use their expertise to develop a report, but then actually get it out there to do exactly what you said, to say teachers actually hold focus groups and ask teachers, interpret this. What does this mean to you? And one, make sure they're interpreting it correctly, because if they're not interpreting the reports correctly, then it's not a good report. It's not that the teachers haven't been trained. It's not a good report. The report shouldn't require training to understand them. And two, say what's useful. And there's always a balance between what teachers want to see in a report and what we're comfortable is really valid information, but find that happy middle ground. So what I would like to do is starting this fall, actually to have some focus groups with teachers looking at reports and helping us build them, so that next year when they get a report, it's something we know that they're going to be able to use and know how to read. So absolutely, we can dummy up a report now, although I would not want to dummy up a report now and say this is what you'll get next fall, or next spring, excuse me, but to say this is our first draft, give me feedback, and then get it as good as we can for next spring, because I think that will be very important. Although, again, it'll be a single year report because we are field testing additional items in 15. We're field testing the essay, we're field testing math performance tasks, and we're field testing listening. So those 3 scores will be added in the spring of 16. So there'll be another new report in 16.
Well, I think part of our problem is getting out to the public and to the parents that these are field and pilot tests, and that they're not going to be perfect. And please don't send or get out on your child, the stress level was something unbelievable.
That's something that we can absolutely work on, and I agree with you. I think there are a number of areas which, to watch myself, because the tendency would be to place blame, but I won't. But I will speak from just anecdotally what I have heard from teachers. I think we're coming out of a decade's worth of hardcore testing, and I think one of the unintended consequences of that is that more than using the assessments, they end up using us. And I think at times the teachers can kind of roll into this, well, here's another round of assessments, and so if we do interrupt that sequence in such a way as to provide them with a pilot, and we change the accountability around it, we need to be very, very clear and mindful that teachers are teaching. They don't always have time to read the kinds of policy changes that we might put out. So it's a long-winded way of saying I agree with you absolutely. That's instrumental to relieve some of that stress and to help them carve out some space so that they can have control over these things.
John Bacon.
Thank you. One of the things that I think we can count on is that the World Wide Web is not reliable. I mean, it's subject to all kinds of problems. So why don't we try to develop a test where, and it's secure, where a student can continue offline? We had an issue in Olathe just in the last month where a contractor hit the internet line for the entire district. So when that kind of stuff happens, we can't afford to have this happen again next year. This year it was a DDoS. Next year, who knows what it will be.
Exactly.
So what are we doing? And did the KTAC group, did they recommend anything of this kind? And what are other testing companies doing? I think we should work towards something of that nature.
Absolutely, and that's one of we've got a couple recommendations from my technical group that we're working on, our technology group. One of which is school or district technology coordinators aren't thrilled with this, but we really want to encourage everyone to use a local caching server, because that does download the test into a local caching server. When the internet goes out, the kid just works with the local caching server, and when the internet's back up, the server feeds stuff back to CETE. So that's what we're doing. Quite honestly, it's a huge deal in Alaska because they have such spotty internet, so that every school, every district will have a local caching server in Alaska, and we're trying to push that in Kansas. And to be clear, a local caching server is, because I'm not a technology person, I thought it was like this thing that sits in a room somewhere, and it's not. It just means it's a little piece of your network, downloads software into it, and acts as a separate server. So it's not like they have to buy new equipment, set it up in a nice place, and it becomes the local caching server, which was my naive vision of it. We are also building in some redundancies to make sure if we get hit by a DDoS, I mean, first of all, we're continuing our contract with the group that came in and saved us on April 1st. It was April Fool's Day. We had contract with them within 2 hours of the DDoS, and they were wonderful. The other thing they give us, in addition to protecting us from DDoS, is they actually help us transfer the large files to districts. They actually take on some of that capacity, which helps with bandwidth issues across the state, from my, again, naive understanding. But we are also putting in some redundancy so that we actually have our items in 2 separate places, so that if one gets hit, we can keep throwing out the items versus another place. We also, my poor technology leadership team, there's 4 of them, we also got concerned that this was a one-way attack, but what happens if someone does try to hack us? What if someone gets in and starts messing with the files, starts getting into our student data? So we have bought a system, again, I don't completely understand this, but that sends out an immediate alert when files are touched, and particularly off hours, that my technology leadership team will be wearing the equivalent of beepers, that they will get woken up in the middle of the night if someone is tampering with our files. It will go off in the middle of the day if someone is getting in there that doesn't have access. They will know instantly. Because as much as we do to prevent it, as much as we do to prevent anything, new techniques to mess with us are developed every day. So this is a way for us to say we'll know instantly if somebody is messing with us. So we're doing a lot of different things to try and avoid this next year, because it is a concern. And we know whatever we prepare for, whatever might hurt us next year probably doesn't exist right now. So we've got to prepare for what we don't even know about yet, which is hard, but I really like the steps my technology team's doing to try and think ahead.
Would there be a large expense associated with this local server you were talking about? I can't remember the term you used, but
it's not an expense. We provide the software for free. What it is that the pushback we get from the technology coordinators is that you have to touch every machine. You know, the one thing about being on the internet is once you've downloaded Kite, you no longer have to touch the machine. But the local caching server, you do have to set it up. So the caching server gets set up to every single machine. And if we send out an update, like we had to update the local caching server after we contract with this other company to put a net around us because it had been blocked, so then they would have to go back and touch every single machine in the school or in the district again to reconnect it to the LCS once the LCS had been reconfigured to work with our new system. And that's the objection, is it's time consuming. It is it's a labor resource, not a money resource.
Janet Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you say they have to touch every machine, are you talking about each individual computer that has to go down there and touch each one of ours?
Yes.
And that's actually very similar to our old testing engine. So one question put me in mind of, taking us back a little while or some space here. Had we decided to give our old test this year and not try out Kite, we would have had, I think, at this point, a slightly different problem. The good news is, because of the way that engine worked, it had to be loaded on every single machine, like Microsoft Word or something. It would not have been affected by the DDoS. And in fact, everything would have worked beautifully. It's immune from that kind of attack, and we would have pushed out performance categories without incident. The challenge at that point would have been a different kind of validity issue. I know I'm going to be kicked for using that word. What does that mean? I mean, we're now making pronouncements about individual students on standards that are 4 years old that don't align to instruction. So, but again, that's another one of those reasons that we're moving away from that old test engine, because it's so labor intensive. Hundreds of machines that have to be physically touched. And
okay, thank you. That's not why I pushed my name, but I did that just came to mind, and I had another one came to mind while you were talking. Did we ever find out the origin?
No, we did not. And the other interesting thing is it's still happening. I mean, they never stopped. To this day, we are still getting attacked just as strongly as we were on April 1st. It's just that we're blocking it now, but whoever started is continuing to try and get at us.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, then what I wanted to say was, the reason I pushed the button is, as you all know, I represent you on the Confidence in Kansas Public Education Task Force. And we sponsor the Challenge Awards. and the challenge awards depend upon the assessments to determine who is eligible to receive these awards. And we knew this was going to be a transition year, and therefore we've been discussing this prior to all of this happening, of how we would handle it and you know what we would do. Anyway, at our last meeting, we determined that we are going to suspend it this year. We will not have a challenge awards because we felt, due to so many things and being a transition year particularly, you know, that we wanted to make sure that we had, so we're going to have to determine how we're going to reevaluate the system that we use to determine the people who will be recognized. So anyway, just an FYI, that's why we will not be doing that, not necessarily because we were hacked, but because this is a transition year. So thank you.
Kathy Bush, and before the next question came up, I was going to say we'll take a question from Kathy Bush and then have a 10-minute break. But we'll see if we can get through 2 questions in about 5 minutes here. So, Kathy Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions and maybe a comment. Now, the KITE engine itself, that's the engine we would have used regardless whether it was a CET test or Smarter Balance test or whichever, and I don't know that the public understands that, but that is the new test engine, isn't that correct?
That is correct, and we would have used it. We just would not have used it this year because it's also a field test for Smarter Balance. So it would have been, we would have had 1 extra year to get everything ready, and then we would have used it in spring of 15.
Mm-hmm. Then as far as data is concerned, and this might be a question for Scott, but I think most districts, I know the state assessment is a summative piece of data for a child, but most districts do have some other data pieces that they use to show instructional progress for the children and that type of thing.
Absolutely. In fact, they like to remind us of that. We are doing other things and have these other means of knowing how well they're doing.
So parents certainly have access to that kind of data. They have data that shows how their children are doing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, and you know, I'm supportive. I really appreciate the efforts that have been put forth by the schools, by CETE and the department as far as going through the trials and tribulations of this pilot year. I think we knew it was going to be difficult. We just didn't know how difficult. But I do think it's progress. I think it's going to be moving in the right direction as far as an assessment that will lend itself better data for our children instead of this teach to the test mentality that I feel like personally we had with the old test. So I think it's going to lend itself to a better product in the future, which I feel quite comfortable with. And if we have to have a year where we don't report results, then so be it. I feel like we are moving towards a better way to give children and parents feedback, and school districts. And, you know, Brad mentioned earlier, you know, there are ways that we're going to look at in showing college readiness, and, you know, this is just one way. There is a wealth of data out there that shows our children being college ready, and I think we just, along with KBOR, if we're moving that way, I think that's a great thing. So I think this is one piece of information that we're going to move forward on, and it will get better. So thank you.
Dina Horst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would also like to say kudos to your patience and your perseverance, not only yours, but to the districts and the teachers and the students to go ahead and finish the assessments and give us some idea of where we need to go next with the new engine. My question also has, or a question I have, has to do with some phone calls I received from special needs supervisors. I think would probably be a good way of terming their positions. How did we deal with special needs children? Was there any difference in how we directed that arena, or because they seem to almost be more frustrated than some of the regular eds teachers and principals, etc.?
Well, first I'd say there's a couple categories within special needs. So obviously the kids with the most significant cognitive disabilities took the DLM field test this year, which did go very well. And I hope you all got a chance to see the Education Week article that highlighted, I think it was Prosperity Elementary School in the Buhler School District, and highlighted some of the kids and one of the teachers there that worked so hard on field testing this assessment, and with great results. The special needs kids, we have about 10% in the states in terms of students with disabilities, another 12%, I believe, that are English language learners. And then of that 10% of them take the DLM. So we still have 90% of our special ed kids taking the general assessment. This year, the big thing we had was a new voice for the text-to-speech. And so the allowance on the text-to-speech, and quite honestly, that was one of the things that did not work well March 10th to April 10th. Again, any audio file like that takes up bandwidth, and so that caused a problem. And there were just several issues that we had to work through. Some were on the district side, majority were on our side, but it took us a while to work through them until we got to the good window. So I know that caused huge frustration. The feedback we got is people like the voice. Heather is much more pleasant than David. So the Heather voice is happy. There was one complaint about Heather might be a little bit too fast for the majority of kids and a little too slow for kids with visual disabilities who are used to being able to play things fast to get the information quickly. So we are changing that next year so kids can control the speed of the voice and slow it down when necessary or speed it up when necessary. Majority of our tools and things like highlights, reverse contrast, enlarging, everything like that worked very well. So we got good feedback on that. I have to be honest, one of my new mantras now is baby steps. Let's not throw all the technology out there in 1 year. Maybe that's not the best way to do it. So I'm now delaying until 2016 2 additional accommodations that I would like. One of which, actually 3, excuse me. One of which is refreshable Braille, so that a child only has to plug their machine into a computer and they'll get the Braille. They don't have to take a paper form. And that will allow them, when we go adaptive, to be able to be adaptive as well. Second, for the same reason, is a Spanish translator, so that a child who needs it will be able to click on a word and get the Spanish translation, as long as it's not the vocabulary word that's being tested, obviously, but for the most part, be able to get the translation of a phrase or a word to help them, so they don't need to take a paper Spanish version, which again doesn't allow them to be adaptive. The third is we'll be working with the Kansas School for the Deaf to create sign language videos that we can embed in the assessment. For this coming year, 2015, we will be adding listening items. So listening for a student who is deaf or profoundly hard of hearing means sign. That's what listening is sign without any written word. So we will be producing this year, so this is my baby step, for this year we will be producing sign language videos for the listening items, because again, they're going to take up a huge amount of bandwidth. And certainly for the Kansas School for the Deaf, all the kids will need it. So that's a huge amount of bandwidth, as opposed to some schools that only have 1 or 2 kids that'll need it. But it'll give us a chance to test it out before we put video on every single computer. So we are moving in the direction, and again, with adaptive too, we hope that'll help some of the kids that have more of the learning disabilities or lesser cognitive disabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you both for all that you've done to get us through this difficult time, and we're looking forward to good times ahead and valuable assessments for our students. We will take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 25 till 12. Well, I believe we are all here with the exception of Jim, and I think he's in the vicinity. So we'll turn it over to Scott Gordon, who's going to talk about guidelines for the PPC.
Good morning. Thank you.
just to kind of let you know where this is coming from, as you're aware, the fingerprinting regulation is going through the normal process. We are about to set that for public hearing. I haven't scheduled it yet. With the new requirements for fingerprinting, we're anticipating up to, I believe, 33,000 fingerprints over the next 5 years. That's somewhere over 500 additional background checks we're going to be clearing or reviewing a month. And as I had discussed with you whenever we were discussing the regulations, we're going to have to figure out some way to deal with this onslaught of background checks we're going to receive, as well as deal with the large number of background checks we already get. I know many of you have received calls and had questions about how can we speed up this process to get these licenses approved. This is my proposal to speed up the process, starting off with kind of outlining what you've done since I've been here with all the background checks, kind of showing you statistically if we follow the same pattern. Many of these applications don't necessarily need to even be set for a hearing before the Professional Practices Commission or the State Board. What I can tell you is that you have reviewed 74 applications or formal complaints since December 1st, 2012. The only ones that I'm going to be discussing are complaints or allegations based on criminal misconduct, where there has been a conviction or someone has been placed on diversion. There have been more instances, and there will be more instances of misconduct that did not result in a criminal conviction. That's a completely separate issue. This is only those that come to our attention due to background checks or we get information from prosecuting attorneys. Of the 74, 57 of them were granted, 17 were either denied or revoked. This is kind of the breakdown for you. Of all the felonies that have showed up, you have not approved anyone convicted less than 5 years ago, which is good because you're not allowed to by statute. But 2 of them were felons that were placed on diversion less than 5 years ago were approved. You can see the numbers there between 5 and 10 years. You've had 4 that you've approved, and over 10 years ago, 3 people that had been convicted of a felony were approved for their license. Misdemeanors, you'll recall that what we look for is any misdemeanor involving theft, drugs, or a crime involving a child as either a victim or as a necessary element. I don't mean that, if there was a seatbelt violation, there happened to be a child in the car, that's not what we're talking about. Or a minor in possession, technically the minor may or may not be considered a child, but that is the applicant themselves that would have been convicted as a minor in possession. We have not considered those as well. You've approved 6 people that were either placed on diversion or convicted less than 5 years ago. 5 to 10 years ago, there was 1 person on diversion you approved, and several people over 10 years ago, 9 total that were approved. Theft, you can see there's quite a few more people that were either convicted or placed on diversion for theft. I can repeat the numbers to you if you like, but you can read them in front of you. Pretty wide variety of the different types of, or the timeline is varied. What I would tell you is I did not break down theft or drugs or any other misdemeanors for a period of time less than 5 years, but I can tell you most of the misdemeanor convictions and diversions you're seeing are at least 2 years old. It's very rare that you've seen any kind of diversion or conviction for a misdemeanor that was a year or less that have come before you. There's been some, but not very many. And what I can tell you is that the 2 individuals that had a crime that we considered involving children, the only ones you've seen were 2 diversions that occurred less than 5 years ago. In both of those cases, it was someone working at a bar or working in a restaurant that had served alcohol to an undercover agent trying to bust individuals for serving minors. In both cases, it turned out that, well, I didn't realize they were a minor. I was very sorry, and you approved their license. And the PPC recommended that you approve their license as well. In fact, since December 1st, 2012, there has not been a time that you have not followed the recommendations of the Professional Practices Commission. The denials or the revocations since December, 10 of them have occurred less than 5 years ago, again, which is appropriate because pursuant to statute, even if you really like the applicant, if someone has been convicted of a felony, you are not allowed to issue them a license. There have been at least 2 times where someone had been convicted of a felony that probably would have been issued a license, but for it had been less than 5 years since the offense. And there's only been one conviction that you did not approve between 5 and 10 years ago. Misdemeanor with drugs, there's been 4 total that you have not approved. And theft, there's only been 2 total that you have not approved. And I'm going to break these down in later slides so you can see exactly why you did not approve, or why I believe you did not approve these particular licenses. And there have been no instances where we've had a conviction or a diversion for any offense involving a child that you have denied or revoked. There's only been 2, so it's not like there's a whole lot of them that you've allowed. I know that that may seem like you're letting every child, everyone that abuses a child in the classroom. That's not the case. You haven't even seen those applications. Here's why you've denied the felons. 6 of them were sex offenses that complaints were filed by the Kansas State Department of Education, and many of those were voluntary surrenders, or they just didn't show for their hearings. That you went ahead and revoked their license, or you denied them. 2 of them were DUIs. There was 1 case involving burglary and theft from a school that we filed a formal complaint. That person did not challenge the complaint that we had filed, so it's kind of a default finding. 1 case involved commercial bribery. Again, that person did not decide to participate. That was someone running a scam driving school that had been convicted. It took us a little while to get the formal complaint filed, but there was no response. And then 1 case involving theft that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Of the people that you have denied for misdemeanors, it appears from this that so long as you show up for your hearing and you don't steal from a school and you don't admit to still smoking marijuana, they have their license granted. Those have been the only cases that you have denied someone their license if it was a misdemeanor, diversion, or conviction. So what I'm suggesting, based on kind of that history, and these recommendations also come from your Professional Practices Commission. I've been discussing this kind of framework with them for several months. And this is what they had recommended, and I tend to agree with them. They wanted to treat someone that is renewing their application, and again, the 33,000 that I referenced, those are all going to be people renewing their applications. They felt that if someone has been teaching for some time, that may be an indication of rehabilitation. Or at least it's an indication that they are still a good teacher, that we can go ahead and leave them in the classroom. If it's a felony, conviction, or diversion, and it's older than 5 years, I'm asking for the discretion. Again, this is just allowing my office to have the discretion to approve these people without sending them through a hearing for the Professional Practices Commission, and you would never see them. And if someone is renewing their license, if it's a misdemeanor, conviction, or a diversion of the type that I've been discussing, if it's over 2 years old and we haven't done anything to revoke their license since then, or since the time that it occurred, go ahead and allow it. We would allow them to renew their license. If it is a new applicant, Professional Practices Commission felt it was appropriate that if it's over 10 years old, it's probably old enough you can go ahead and issue the license without a full hearing. And if it's a misdemeanor that occurred more than 3 years ago for a new applicant, we could go ahead and approve it. You had a question, or you're about to?
I hate to ask it, but what's the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor?
It's as it's defined by statute.
Yeah,
Offenses by statute are defined as a felony.
What kinds?
Rape, murder, your 3rd or more lifetime DUI, theft over $1,000, or theft that's occurred the 3rd time, I believe, within 5 years. The more severe offenses are going to be felonies.
Well, I knew that, but I didn't know where the line was, between the two.
One example would be if you stole over $1,000 worth of stuff from one particular store, that'd be a felony. If you went and stole a video game or a DVD or anything less than $1,000, it's a misdemeanor.
Thank you.
Felony, yeah, it's 1st or 2nd DUI would be a misdemeanor. 3rd or more would be felony.
Okay. would you like questions now that I see here, or do you want to finish what you're saying first?
Let me go through the next couple of slides, and then I'll back up, because I may answer some of the questions. The cases to which I'm just going to tell you, my office will always set these for a hearing, is anything that's prohibited by statute. I didn't list them all here, but they are probably the most offensive felonies you could think of, that they are barred by statute from receiving a license, period. No matter what, those are always going to get set for a hearing, so that the PPC and the board can officially tell them, we will never grant you a license. If someone has multiple offenses over a period of time, say they were convicted 5 years ago and then they received a version 2 years ago, well, that shows some kind of a pattern, or it may show some kind of a pattern that they haven't stopped criminal acts or misconduct. We would set that for review in front of the Professional Practices Commission. Every type of sex offense, I don't care if a child is involved or not, would be set for a hearing. You'll recall that there was a complaint filed several months ago. The individual, no children were present. I don't know of any victims that were around except for the people that saw it. Well, they were actually charged with a misdemeanor sex offense. We felt that that was heinous enough that at the very least you needed to review that person's license, and you revoked that person's license. So again, regardless of what type of sex offense, it would get reviewed. And there are going to be some cases that just kind of, I don't really know how to describe it other than to say the ick factor, or there's just something that seems wrong about this particular offense, whether there's a lot of offenses all at one time, if there was a victim, we would probably set those for hearing for professional practices and come before you. And obviously anything involving children as victims, we would absolutely set that for a review by the Professional Practices Commission and the State Board. Again, I'm just asking for the discretion to approve more cases than what I have been approving since December. Right now, anyone that has any kind of diversion or conviction for those 4 types of offenses, felonies, anything involving drugs, anything involving children, anything involving theft, I've been setting for hearing, because I thought that that's what you wanted to see, and that's what the Professional Practices Commission wanted to see. Based on the statistics, using this framework, those people would have gotten their license anyway, most likely. So trying to kind of speed things up. Now might be a good question. There's more materials for me to cover, but now might be a good time for questions.
Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indeed, you did answer one of my questions, Scott. Thank you. But where I'd like to take this is in the future, when we welcome more professionals into our classrooms, when we're more welcoming to the public. There's a crisis of employment in this country that we have a lot of work to do. So I'm thinking about in the future, I don't know what the time frame would be, 5, 10, maybe even 20 years, when we work toward registering people initially and then worrying about license a little more after they've been on the job for some time. Do you see how this framework would dovetail into some future scenario by which we would insist that people have to be registered before getting to the classroom instead of fully licensed?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by registered.
Well, we have to know who's in the classroom. I mean, we have to. Before we entrust someone with the keys to the classroom, we have to know who these people are, because we have to protect our children. But we also have to be welcoming to people who say, you know, I think I could be a good teacher. Well, instead of making them go to school for 4 years, we need to have them registered. And for some people, they just don't have the chops for whatever reason. They may have the best intentions in the world, but they're not cut out to be a teacher. So the future system will not make these people go to school for 5 years before they find that out. So if we had a system where we register people and then license them after they've been on the job, would this framework also work?
No.
Okay.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I don't want to use the phrase registered, because that usually refers to a violent offender or a sex offender. And we don't have anything to do with registering individuals. When someone applies for a license,
okay,
even with the professionals that are going to be coming in under the specialized license that we've been working with, they're going to have to get fingerprinted where we're going to receive their backgrounds. I wouldn't call it having them registered, but once we have their fingerprints on record with the KBI, we know what their background is, and we will probably, 98% chance, we're going to know if they get arrested or convicted of any crime in Kansas. We get that through RATBAC. If by registered you mean we will be able to keep track and monitor these individuals, yes, I think the fingerprint regulation that you've already approved takes care of that.
Yeah, I think it's going to get down to semantics, whether we have tiered licenses and so forth, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Dina Horst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question has to do with other professions. Do they allow individuals how do they deal with applicants for licensure when they have this kind of a background?
I would say very similarly. I haven't attended any conferences or anything and discussed this in great detail, but I know other state agencies in Kansas that issue license go through a very similar process. Many of them are much faster because they don't have a peer review group. They don't have a professional practices commission that sees it first. And that is part of the delay is the PPC, as you know, meets as often as they can. Mm-hmm. If I get them to meet once a month, it's great, but that doesn't always happen, especially during the summer. And so these dockets kind of build up, or the number of applications build up before they get there. Do I think that this framework is consistent with what other licensing agencies do? Yes. Many licensing agencies are far less concerned with someone's background, unless they're felons or violent offenders, than they are with the conduct that occurs once they're licensed. And my goal with this framework is to be able to spend more time and focus on the individuals once they're licensed.
And I understand that, but I'm concerned that we not lower the expectation of, because I think the public has a great deal of trust in teachers, and I think it's very important that we guard that. And my concerns are that perhaps there are other licensing groups, medical, for example. I know, isn't it impossible for them to get a job once they've had drug convictions and so on? So I guess I'm seeing that while some of it doesn't dovetail quite the same way as a medical license or a legal license, I just want to make sure we're at the same level of expectation for the public.
And I understand that and can appreciate it. That's why I showed you statistically what you've done for the past 18 months.
And go ahead.
You've allowed those people, anyone that if you're concerned with this framework being too lenient, for the 18 months, you've allowed those individuals to get licensed anyway. Sometimes by a 6-4 vote, sometimes by a unanimous vote. And so I haven't done anything to compare with what other state agencies do. I've just done a comparison of what this agency's done for the past 18 months.
And I believe our board attorney has a comment as well.
Thank you.
Since you're excluding from this new framework anything that is prohibited by the statute, you're not lowering the bar.
Right.
you're still, I mean, you're still, anything that's required for a hearing by statute, you're still going to permit that.
There's nothing in statute or regulation that requires you to review the applications. It just says that you, as the board, have discretion to deny, revoke, suspend, or censor someone's license if they have this kind of an offense. And again, anything prohibited by Section A of 72-1397, that doesn't go away. Those people still will never get licensed. About the only thing that has changed is Section B and C of that same statute allow some offenses to still receive a license if you make a finding that they've been rehabilitated for at least 5 years since the date of conviction, or in the case of a diversion, once they finish diversion. As long as you make that, you have to make specific findings. This framework, you are making that finding if you follow these particular frameworks. That's why I went with the 5 years or more. I'm absolutely open to suggestions. This is just one mechanism to kind of alleviate the burden, if you will, the backlog. Yes.
Our commissioner has a comment too.
And I was just throwing out a thought. Yeah. So thank you for your answer.
Well, I was just going to make a comment that I'd asked about a month ago, or maybe longer, anticipating the onslaught of a lot of fingerprints now coming in. I had asked Scott to go back in history and look at the cases that historically the PPC has recommended and this board has approved, and then build a template or a framework to say, well, if these are the ones that you have the authority to go ahead and issue a license, and they look like this, to help the PPC's agenda, if we're approving them anyway, let's find out which ones those are, and when they come across Scott's desk, he can go ahead and move those forward, and we take to the PPC the ones that they really need to see, and to help eliminate if we're approving them anyway. So that's what Scott did, was he went clear back a couple of years and said, here's the ones that traditionally you're approving, so let's go ahead and quit sending those to PPC. Now, and I have faith that Scott will look, if he sees anything outside of that framework or something in it that is unique, those will go on. These are just the ones that, so that's, I hope that helps.
Dina, were there further comments? Well, thank you. Ken Willard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, this framework is initially or primarily designed to relieve some burden on the staff in this transition. Yes. Do you foresee it as being a framework that will go on past that initial fingerprinting of all the existing teachers?
Well, I anticipate this going on until either the next person in my position or you change it.
Okay.
Well, we'll just kind of use it as we need.
Some of these people who have been approved have been approved, as you mentioned, on split votes, maybe 6-4 votes or whatever. I personally would not want to lose the opportunity to review those kinds of issues that come up, or applicants that come up, because that, in my view, would be kind of lowering the bar somewhat. Obviously, and I'm concerned about what are these existing teachers that are going to be fingerprinted, what kinds of offenses that, well, let me phrase it a different way. If that fingerprinting reveals an offense that would have prevented them from getting a license in the first place, I would not want that to be overlooked. I think that we ought to review as well. Because as Dina mentioned, we don't want any lowering of the bar, any perception of lowering of the bar, or any actual lowering of the bar, and I think that we need to see those. I can understand your effort, and I support it, but if somebody were currently licensed and would have we find something that would have fallen under the statute, which prevented them, obviously they would go to the PPC, right?
That's right.
Okay. Or if anybody that we have denied, one of those kind of cases came, that would go to the PPC.
That's right.
Okay. So that is already built into the framework.
That's the intention. That's when I say any particular offense, which we feel, you absolutely need to see it. And I should have included in there, my intention is if you have previously denied someone their license, then no matter what, it would come back before you again.
Okay. Well, I would like to expand that just enough to cover the cases where we approve somebody on split votes, if it's possible to delineate that.
Referring specific, I can think of two that have been approved on a split vote. One of them was a gentleman that had actually, lied on his application 4 times, and by statute should not have received his license at least one of those prior times.
I would want to see that one.
This board approved it 6-4.
Yeah. Well, we might approve it again, but I still would want to see it.
That's going to prove difficult. I mean, sure, I'll bring it to you again.
So if anybody, if you uncover somebody who's lied on their application 3 or 4 times, they're going to be approved because we've allowed it in the past.
You're going to have a lot, and that's actually going to be the next thing I'm going to talk about is the questions asked on the applications. You're going to have a lot of applicants that have lied on their past applications that were approved.
Then need to be getting rid of some teachers then.
Well, I'm telling you, 80% of them are going to come back saying that sometime in the past, they did not accurately fill out their application. That's a guess. But
80% of the applicants?
Yes.
Will have admitted they've
lied
on the
application. On the previous application. And here's what they're going to say. And I tell you what, and I'll answer your question, I'm going to address that next.
All right.
That whole issue. I don't know if you want me to take her question now.
I
okay.
have 2 pending here.
Okay.
Jim McNeese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we just clarify? I want to go back to Steve's issue of registered and different licenses. And first of all, no one will ever be in front of our students or engaged in our school without having a license for that task if they're being assigned.
Yeah, that's what the law says, yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I picked up that under this new tier that we're developing with the legislation that came to us as well as things we were doing, that they wouldn't get a license, so they wouldn't have to, but...
May I correct that?
That's why...
They are getting a license.
That's correct.
Yeah, that does not change the requirement that they get fingerprinted and they go through the license process.
I didn't want to leave any confusion. They're getting a license and they will go through this system.
That's right.
Okay, I'm checking them.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, whether they went through a college of education or they were an engineer at Boeing and decided they wanted to be a teacher.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, I can tell you there's been some wordplay between us and the Department of Administration about what we call these particular licenses. And we had to use the right words so that I could make sure that these people get fingerprinted.
Exactly.
Yeah, and yes, that's taken care of.
Okay. Thank you very much.
John Bacon.
Thank you. One of the duties that I think that we do that's very important is licensing teachers in the state. So I get a lot of calls about a lot of stuff that doesn't, relate to anything I do, but that is one thing. If we got a teacher that's in the classroom and we license them, we need to answer for that. I really don't have a problem with your framework, but I kind of want to see how it plays out. So is there a process where we could get a report on a semi-annual basis or something like that to where we see the felonies, convicted felons that may be old, but whatever, that are in the classroom that have received a license that it didn't go to the Professional Practices Commission, it didn't come to us. It was just approved in the department.
And I actually generate a report like that for the PPC on a somewhat regular basis of the other types of offenses that they don't even see because they weren't specifically outlined in the regulation. I have absolutely no problem with there's no reason why we couldn't generate a report and review this 12 months from now.
Good. All right, thanks.
What I would say is, and this kind of goes to, Ken, your concern, once you issue someone's teaching license, knowing about the 5 bad things they did before, once you issue that license, I understand you want to see them again, but taking it away from them afterwards,
Well, it would give us
going to be tough.
It would give us an opportunity to know how our policy is working, even though we might have, one slip through.
Mm-hmm.
But we could adjust our policy if we see too many slipping through. This isn't working the way we thought it was going to, so we can change it.
Absolutely, I can do that. My staff can do that, I should say.
Great suggestion. Sally Cobble, I didn't mean to ignore you, but people had been waiting before you.
No.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. That question on that test, on that applicant is not clear. And that's why they lie.
I'll address that in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
About whether it's unclear or not.
Okay.
Sorry, just kind of, because I know you're getting onto the questions of what's on the application. Again, of the 57 applications, and I just reviewed on the language that was included in the final order, at least 13 of them, you made the finding and the PPC made the finding that they did not appropriately disclose the applicant's criminal history. And in fact, the only 2 people that you denied their license that had not disclosed it, it was denied for other reasons. They didn't bother showing up for their hearing. So no one has been stopped from getting their license when they don't fill out the application correctly on the application. And this is the way, and I know this is difficult to read, this is how we've changed the question. Ken, you had asked the question at one of these presentations, the question, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And you asked me, what's confusing about that? You're asking me, and I tell you, no, there's nothing confusing about that question. I can't tell you how many times I hear or I get letters from people saying, or they testify in front of the PPC, well, I didn't know I had ever been convicted of a theft. I will never in my life understand that statement. I can't understand it. Either you've been in front of the courts so often you forget what you've been convicted of, and that's a problem, or there's something else going on that you don't know you've ever been convicted. I've used the analogy a million times. I can tell you exactly the eye color of the one, well, never mind. I'm not going to sell myself out too much. No, I've never been convicted or arrested. But we have changed in response to several concerns people had about, well, that question was confusing. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? And it even asks below, please read the following questions, failure accurate. They answer these questions or submit the appropriate documents will delay the issuance. Unless expunged, you are required to disclose both adult and juvenile offenses. And it asks, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you ever been convicted of any crime involving theft, drugs, or a child? Have you ever entered into a diversion agreement or otherwise had a prosecution diverted? I'm open to suggestions. I don't know how to make those questions clearer. The problem isn't people not understanding the questions. 2 of the most recent hearings we had, one of the gentlemen actually stood up and says, no, I knew what the question said. I knew I had been convicted of drug possession. I answered no because I was going to turn in my expungement paperwork the next day, and I was hoping it was going to get expunged before you all caught it. The person now has a license. That person lied on the application, knowing it hadn't been expunged. The problem isn't the questions on the application. The problem is people don't want to tell you. They think, for one reason or another, that those questions don't apply to them. And yes, I'm extremely opinionated about this. I don't hide that fact. But they think for whatever reason, either because it's too old or because they were told by their prior attorneys that they never have to disclose it, or they just figured, well, no one's ever caught me before, which is why I say 80% of the applicants have not filled out their applications correctly in the past, because in the past the background checks weren't as good. People don't fill out, they just don't answer the applications correctly. This week, I emailed an example to Brad because I wanted him to see I'm not making this up. There was someone that applied for renewing her license, and she marked yes. But then she submits a follow-up letter saying, I don't know how to answer this question because in the past, I knew it was very important to disclose all of my criminal behavior. Well, now I don't know what to do. It's not confusing. You cannot convince me otherwise. I mean, I'm open to suggestions. We've changed it. I will tell you that, again, and they may be getting bad advice from their defense attorneys. I've had that argument with attorneys about whether or not they have to disclose a diversion or what a diversion is. I don't expect everyone applying to be a teaching license to be an expert in this. What I can tell you is it takes 3 times as long to process these applications because of people not answering the questions correctly. You have created, I know questions are coming, but I know there's going to be an onslaught of questions after my next suggestion. You have created a system where you're relying on a fingerprint system to let you know when someone has either been convicted or arrested or placed on diversion of offenses anywhere in the country, anywhere that gets reported to the KBI and the FBI. The number of times that we find out about someone's criminal background strictly by them disclosing it to us and it not showing up on the background is negligible. My suggestion to teacher licensure is to get rid of these questions. Stop asking. These questions. There's other questions. The next slide will cover more questions we're still going to ask. But my strong suggestion is to do away with this question. Now, I know there's questions. So.
Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think it's bold and refreshing, actually. Thank you that you'd say I think we should expunge these questions, although expunge has a different meaning, I'm sure. I'm convinced, and I've been convinced for the longest time, that our teacher licensure is sort of backwards in that we make it very difficult to get into the classroom, and once we're there, it's kind of easy to stay. And it should be reversed in some fashion. It should be a little easier to get in and a little harder to stay. And that's where I want our process to go, because we all share the goal of having an effective educator in every classroom. So if the next part of your presentation takes us in that direction, I'm going to be all for it. And I think getting rid of these questions may actually take us in that direction as well.
And I'll clarify. We're not doing away with the background checks. If we find something that we need to review, then they will get the letters saying, turns out you were convicted of this, please send us these documents. That part won't change. What changes is the opportunity for people to, and I'll even be polite and say, inaccurately fill out the application. Just eliminate that as an issue. Don't even give them the opportunity to lie or mislead or not fill out the application correctly. Because it hasn't stopped them from getting a license. They are always going to say the same thing every single time. I'm real sorry, my attorney told me I didn't have to tell you that. I didn't think that applied to me. I hear that every single PPC hearing. Except the one guy that admitted, yeah, no, I lied. I was just hoping I wouldn't get caught. Mm-hmm. He was the most honest. But no one ever says that. So it does not do away with our ability to check on or follow up on this. It just makes the process a little faster. My opinion.
Brad has a comment.
Well, and I think the answer we're not getting is, and the reason why is because now we're going to be getting all the fingerprints. So we'll be, in the past, we didn't have all the fingerprints. Now that we could eliminate these questions and base it on what's turned into us from the fingerprints.
Because to be honest, we're not relying on the answers to these questions anyway. The only thing we get from these is to find out whether the people are being honest with us. That's kind of important. Which is really the only reason we still need to ask. because we should be finding out the information anyway through other means. So, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brent. Sorry.
Ken Willard.
And what you've just told us is infuriating to me. And I'm certainly want to hear the rest of the presentation. But if we were to keep that question, I would put it in red and say any falsification on this question will either prevent you from getting a license or cause you to lose your license if it's found out. But I don't know. This adds to the strength of my desire to have information on people's applications who have been approved on split votes. We obviously have a serious integrity problem, and it's not just in the teaching ranks; it's in the culture. And I just really hate to accept that. But I can understand the rationale for getting rid of the question if we're going to catch every instance and have an opportunity to address it. So, I'm reluctant to hear fewer cases myself. I'll just leave it at that.
For what it's worth, the two split votes that I can think of most recently, one of which the applicant did not disclose that she'd previously been convicted of a felony. It doesn't matter how I would have worded that. She believed that she didn't have to tell you. And there are people that honestly believe that they don't have to tell you. They thought it was expunged. Whether I believe that or not doesn't matter. But I can't prove otherwise that they thought it had been expunged. Or that they thought it had disappeared. So,
well, this question says, unless expunged, you're required to disclose.
The one person I'm thinking of, she thought it had been expunged, had a piece of paperwork that said it had been expunged, except you still have to tell the state board.
It hadn't been done, I recall
right.
now, yeah.
So again,
all right.
I'm open to suggestions to change the questions, but, sorry, anyway, other questions?
Dina Horst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, are expungements something that show up on background checks?
If it has been expunged, it will not show up on the background check.
Okay.
It shouldn't. I should say it shouldn't. There are times to where someone will have the expungement paperwork in hand saying, look, I had this expunged 2 years ago. Like, all right, sorry, the KBI got this wrong. Go forth and be licensed.
Are there states that have a different attitude toward expungement that may create an issue too?
Yes.
In that sense?
California has a different definition of expungement, to where it is expunged for all purposes except, and then one of the exceptions is professional licensure. Missouri, they have what they call a deferred judgment, which means they put someone on probation for 5 years, and if they successfully complete the probation, the offense goes away. They were never convicted. It wasn't expunged. It's just they do it differently than Kansas.
Okay.
And those aren't the only two states. Those are just the two common ones I've seen.
And when someone, after we get through all of the renewals of current teachers, and they come back and renew again, is the background check done again?
They don't do another background check. If anything new happens, we find out about it through RATBAC.
The RATBAC
Right. We don't run another background check so long as they still have a valid.
So anyone whose fingerprints are on file, you know about it?
That's right.
Okay. All right. other than the honesty and the dishonesty component, removing those questions may be a good idea. But I'll think about that one. But thank you.
Jim McNeese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In lieu of when you say you're going to when you say you're going to remove those questions, does that shorten the application, or are we going to substitute something in there?
The only thing we'd probably replace it with an explanation of you are submitting fingerprints and support. If anything shows up as part of your criminal history, we will notify you if we need more information. I haven't worded exactly the way it's going to be, but it's something to that effect.
Yes, so there'll be a cautionary tale that they can now say, oh, I didn't pay attention to that. Right. Didn't see that one. But for our benefit and for the benefit of the classroom, we will have that in the application. Would we be interested in adding a section underneath that? Do you want to tell us anything now? I'm serious.
And I didn't get to the part yet.
Oh, you're coming to that?
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of.
No, because there is, there can be extenuating circumstances. Don't want to take exception with you, but there is a restorative justice issue here that people have the right, or not the right, but have the opportunity, after they've made mistakes, to rectify it and move on with their lives. And we have many people who have gone on and done great things that made terrible mistakes early, or mistakes earlier that could have jeopardized licensure or whatever. And have that, they have the right and the opportunity to correct their lives. So with that, if they were voluntarily providing this information with explanation and taking this thing as seriously as that, I think that would be a mark in their benefit, in terms of whether they had indeed rectified their lives and moved on and taken a higher road. So let's see what you have.
And I don't mean to say that absolutely everyone lies on their application. There are many people that do accurately disclose. Some people disclose things they don't need to.
Sure.
Those are the ones that you never see anyway. Those aren't the ones that really concern me. It's those that don't disclose it. To follow up on your question, what I threw up on there on the next slide is these are the questions that are going to stay. These are the issues that will not show up on a rat pack necessarily. First one is criminal charges pending against you. Sometimes they answer that accurately, mostly they don't. We had one just recently because we knew a felony had been pending against that person when she renewed her license, but she never disclosed it. If you've ever had any other kind of license revoked, if there's any kind of disciplinary action against you, please let us know. If you've ever been disbarred, suspended, revoked, for any profession, as well as have you ever been caught cheating. Those questions are going to remain. And we actually get more accurate disclosures about have you ever had a previous license revoked or suspended or otherwise had issues with it. Those are more accurately disclosed to us than the criminal histories. I don't know why that is. The only thing I could think of is probably no one ever told them they didn't have to put that on an application. But those questions would absolutely remain.
Scott, how much more do you have to present? I'm looking at the clock. So we'll take Ken Willard's question and then we will adjourn for lunch.
What I think you just said was interesting because I was just going to say we can just assume that people are going to lie on these questions as well.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah. Should this application state somewhere just for their edification that falsification of any of these questions could result in loss of your license?
And we may actually have that. Right, the professional conduct, that failure to accurately answer these questions or submit appropriate documents will delay. And I suppose we could make that stronger language.
You should. Yeah.
That statement would remain. Because all of the questions I just showed you all fit within that section of professional conduct.
I would just say that it should, rather than will delay, could result in loss of your license or termination of license. Okay. Stronger than will delay.
We can certainly make it stronger.
Okay. Thank you.
And Brad has a comment.
And our goal today was just to present to you some ways that we believe we could move forward and go ahead and approve some of those that are, I don't want to say traditionally, always approved. Look for a way to reduce the number of the load that is going to eventually be coming to the PPC, but at the same time, looking at some of the suggestions here, treat this as a pilot with quarterly updates to keep you informed on where we're at and how it's going. And we still have time on this.
We do. I've got quite a few applications sitting on my desk waiting for your approval of this. But yes, that's kind of the goal.
So the plan would be to bring this back to us next month for our approval. What timeline are we looking at, Brad?
But I don't think it's something that necessarily needs a formal vote. It's just, do you approve of the direction we're headed with this? And if not, we can keep it the same way we are, knowing we've got quite a few coming in, but we just want to give you an update, not an action item, but an update of here's what we're looking at doing, is trying to be able to move some of them that historically you've always approved. Go ahead and move those forward, and how we want to streamline. And if the board's okay with us moving in this direction, if not, if you want to see something that looks different, we can take those suggestions and come back.
Well, I guess my question is, did you want that direction from us today, or to give us time to think about it and give you that at the next meeting?
Time to think about it. This was a receive item, just to see where we're at on and see if there was any changes or other direction you wanted us to head. But yes, it would definitely come back to the board if there was other things you wanted us to do.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to say, Scott?
You have anything more? No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, that was a very thorough overview. Thank you for all the thought that went into and research that went into putting this together. Looks like it's lunchtime.